Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Mitchell, all the way from Italy. Roger, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Really honoured to do this show. It's a really, really top podcast and something that I follow quite regularly.
Oh, that's great to hear, Roger. And you spoke previously about your memories of Celtic when you were growing up and your adoration for the likes of Tommy Burns and Charlie Nicholas. What were your memories of Celtic when you were growing up yourself?
Yeah, that's a good place to start because I guess different from a lot of other people, my father wasn't such a big football guy. You know, my father came from an Irish background like so many of us, but my mother's family was Italian. And he was a golfer, but he was Celtic because, you know, that's the way it was. So he didn't take me to a lot of games. So I would be what you would call a kind of like bedroom geek supporter. And the other thing that's interesting, I think it's important that, you know, we grew up in a relatively new housing development. And there was about 8 of us kids, all about the same age. Half Rangers, half Celtic, and you know that's who I hung out with. So I would say I was never engulfed in that whole kind of like, you know, supporters bus from an early age type environment. So my love for Celtic was very passionate, but it was quite a solitary one. Obviously, at school then it's different. You know, you go to school, and I went to school in Paisley, and that was at the time that St Mirren had quite a decent team, and there was quite a wee bit of rivalry there. So myself, you know, I probably saw Celtic more at Love Street than I did at Celtic Park in those early years because, you know, frankly, my dad didn't go that often, as I said, and my mum, you know, being an Italian type mother, she wasn't that happy that I went to football grounds. So I didn't see an awful lot live of Celtic until I got to about 14, and then I was able to start going myself.
Again, it's all about, Roger, looking at everybody's journey when we speak on A Celtic State of Mind. And, you know, the supporters bus thing, that the only reason I was involved in that was because I didn't live in Glasgow, so it had to be a supporters bus, which was an education in itself, Roger.
Paul John, I respect that and in some ways envy it. All I'm trying to say is that, you know, I would be the guy more kind of like filling in the books of stats and at home, rather than being the one that was following the team every week home and away. I think that's important for people to understand.
Sure. You spoke about the greatly talented Charlie Nicholas, and a few times, Roger, I've mentioned recently on the podcast Celtic and Scottish football's inability to produce prolific goal scorers recently. I think the last great goal scorer we got was Charlie. Just how special was he?
Well, you need to lead into this a little bit for me. So I got really into the Celtic view and following the reserve team at the time that Paul McStay, actually both McStays, Davy Moyes, Jim Dobbin, Charlie, they were all coming through. So I, for right or for wrong, had a belief that we were about to have the second Quality Street gang, and based on a strong team that were coming into, that Celtic were about to challenge the way that they had when I was a very young boy. And I got very excited about that, about 14 and 15. And then, you know, as I say, when I started going to games, it was when there was, you know, Charlie was in the team, and he was just an extraordinary talent. You know, like the kind of player that I once saw him at a game, and you know the game was going the way it was going. And at a certain point, I'm sure I saw him like slap his thigh and basically say, "Right, come on," and you know it changed. A genuine talent, but more than that, box office. And, I would say that those hopes that I had when he left and when he was sold, and probably proactively sold, that was devastating for me, because I had an aha moment that we were going to be a selling club. We would never compete. This was before all the money came in and everything like that. We're talking about when it was the 80s, early 80s. And that kind of like coincided a little bit with me becoming more of an adult and thinking about moving overseas. And, so there is a distinct before Charlie and after Charlie moment in my relationship with Celtic.
That's interesting. And obviously you've hit the nail on the head there with regards to the business side of it, becoming a selling club and proactively selling Charlie, because I think he's spoken about that since, Roger. It wasn't the case at the time. Celtic fans thought that Charlie was pushing for a move, and I think it was the other way around, in actual fact. One of the things that I find really interesting about your career, Roger, is that you were involved in the music entertainment business at some stage. How did you get involved in that?
Well, I'm a finance guy, and, when you're in finance, you get to work in a whole lot of companies, and I was lucky enough, or chose to work in what would be considered more sexy type companies that would be, advertising agencies, and then, as you say, the music business, which I was headhunted for. And because most of these things were in Italy, I was a relatively rare bird. I was a Scottish CA, and I spoke Italian. I knew the culture, and I could empathise with them. So I was really what British and American companies were looking for, and EMI was one of them. And, I would say, the best years of my life there, in terms of the age I was, the fun I was having, the success of the company. I really loved that. And then, coming back to how that fits into Celtic, at that time, I guess what I'm saying is I missed most of the 90s, Paul John. Like those horrible years. I was in Italy, and I was able to basically shut it out. And every so often, I would have a wee look. But as their nine got closer, I don't know, there's some kind of like feeling that it comes from the DNA. You say, oh no. And so I started getting closer and closer to it. And then, Fergus, and then obviously the Tommy Burns teams, and then the Three Amigos. And it's felt like a little bit, this is something to come back and have a wee look at. And then the very interesting thing that'll probably lead to the rest of the interview was that year, their 10 in a row year, I think all of us were on tenterhooks. I don't think there's any Celtic fans that won't say that was a very, very difficult year. And I remember specifically the New Year's game, the Paul Lambert goal where we beat them 2-0. I think that was an absolute make or break game. So then the last months, and couldn't get over the line, and not winning at Kilmarnock after being ahead. And then the last game. So I remember I was actually in Switzerland that day, listening to the St Johnstone game. And there wasn't internet or anything like that. You would phone into one of these phone lines every so often, these premium phone lines, and get an update. And, first goal very early on, that was great. Took a lot of the tension away. Then, you're knowing that they're going to win over there. I think it was Dundee United. And, so if we draw, that's over. And, I remember the second goal, when you phone, I was phoning every 5 minutes. The second goal comes in. I just I burst out into tears on Lake Geneva in the middle of that. And it was just genuine relief. I never thought, as I say, since Charlie, I would ever feel that way again. But the relief in some way was equally as powerful as winning something. And then what happened the day after, something I never, ever do, or did, I bought a Sunday paper. Again, no internet in those days. Mm-hmm. I bought the Sunday Times in Geneva, and in the appointment section there was the SPL advert, and I said, I can't believe they're applying for this in a newspaper. I'm going to send in an application. And it was a very brief one, because I didn't believe there was any chance they were going to call somebody like me. And I said, look, sports professionalising, you got to get away from the bowling club culture. I come from the entertainment business. I'm a finance guy, and I used to do sports journalism. I think I may be quite good for you. And to cut a long story short, I got that job. But that's how it went from thinking about Celtic, on May, whatever it was, the 7th in 1998, and buying the newspaper for the next day to read the match report.
Incredible. All of a sudden, you became the CEO of the SPL.
Yeah. It was a breakaway league, and, they said, "Do you want to come in and interview?" And I didn't expect to get called. And then my life and my wife's life were over in Italy and Switzerland. And I kind of said, well, not really. It doesn't suit, my timing. I said, look, I tell you what, I'm going to the World Cup. This was 1998. I've got tickets for the opening game, Scotland, Brazil. If we want to meet there, we can meet and, see if there's any kind of, and they said, well, yeah. And so they lined up a whole lot of guys that were there, from the clubs and the SFA. And I did a whole lot of interviews there. And before they knew it, they were saying, when can you join? And then, the first chairman of the SPL, people won't remember, but he was a wonderful man. The guy that set up the SPL, a guy called Robert Wilson from Deloitte's. He was the acting chairman when we set it up, and he was my boss. I was the CEO, he was the chairman. And, one of the first questions he asked me that in Paris, at a cafe, he said to me, who'd you support? And I said, which was the truth, but, there's ways to tell the truth. I said, look, I used to support Celtic when I was a kid, but I've kind of fallen out of that now, and I don't really, all that kind of stuff. He says, listen, look, you're not going to be able to hide this. You're a Celtic fan, that's fine. I'll speak to David. He'll be fine with it. You need to tell us that you want this job. And that's how it went. I never needed to meet David Murray. I never needed to go through some kind of handshake kind of, it was totally professional.
I mean, it's dead interesting. I remember speaking to Jock Brown, and he was asked a similar question. Are there any pictures, Jock, that might come back to haunt you when he was offered the Celtic job? And he was obviously racking his brains, because there was one picture of him in a Rangers scarf, but it was a promo picture, Roger. But yeah, that's interesting. Now, I'm looking at Scottish football back then, and the big figures, within the game. And the first one I'm going to ask you about is Fergus McCann. As a fan looking at Fergus, and obviously time has been kind to Celtic fans looking back, obviously, they booed him, Roger, on the first day of the following season. Strangely enough, Roger, I've never met a Celtic fan who actually booed that day. So I think that tells its own story.
Well, we've all forgotten about that.
Exactly. Tell us a wee bit about Fergus and just how powerful a man and headstrong he was when he was at the helm.
Yeah, there's the way that I joined was quite funny, because I had to come in the middle of July for some kind of press conference to announce me, and that was with Chris Robinson. And then after that, somebody said, look, why don't we go and see if Fergus is around? Because I'd never met him. I hadn't, when I had been given the job and offered the job and signed, I had met neither Fergus nor David Murray. And so I went up to Celtic Park, and he was around, and he took me for a soup and a sandwich in one of the wee restaurants there. And he was just very forthright. He said, look, this is a horrible business, horrible people. You can't trust them. And he said, look, he went into his story, the classic story of those days for him, which was the Football Trust, Hampden Park, Celtic not getting the money that others got. And, he went into, quite a lot about Farry and the SFA. And for the first meeting, there wasn't any touchy-feely, where do you come from? It was immediately into, this is a difficult environment, don't trust anybody, watch your back. And those people up at Park Gardens are like this. So that was the start. He didn't do niceties. He didn't have any time for small talk or making you feel at your ease. Went straight to the point. I didn't have a huge amount of dealings with him because on the SPL board was Eric Riley, and Eric and I became close over those years, so much so that I met Fergus more at games, and it was just a nod and a chat, and he I think respected Eric Riley's role, that he was the Celtic guy that dealt with the SPL because he was on the board. And there was, I'll just tell you one story, a couple with Fergus. We went to Europe a couple of times together, also to UEFA, and very, 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 very to the point, Fergus. Like when you go to UEFA and these places, you need to understand that 90% of the time they're glad handing each other, they're hugging, they're making it feel as if everybody's in a big family, and everybody hates each other, but it's all false. And Fergus wasn't like that, and we had this agenda where we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and this first agenda item was, I can't remember what it was, but it was relatively quick, and everybody thought that it was an easy thing to decide on. And then somebody, I can't remember, from Belgium or Holland or Greece, I don't know, came in and didn't want to change it, just wanted to make one of these comments that more or less supported what everybody else had said. And Fergus is just sitting beside me, just saying, get it off the table, get it off the table. For him, the agenda item had been dealt with and there was no more time to lose. He was that kind of guy. And the last story about him, I'm sure there's many others, but the one that I remember now, the most poignant one, was that Eric Riley called me up on a Friday, and he said, "Look, you won't realise, but tomorrow 5 years are up for Fergus, and you won't see him after that." I said, "Come on, he'll be around." And he said, "No." He said, "I'll tell you what, he won't even wait to the end of the game. So if you want to say something, say it today." Or catch him. I said tomorrow it'll be a nightmare. So I called Fergus up that 10 minutes later. I said, "Listen, I hear tomorrow you're just going to disappear off the face of the earth." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Look, Fergus, we've always spoken as SPL Celtic, but I'm going to speak to you as a Celtic fan now." And then I told him what I thought he'd done for the club, and I can be quite erudite and charming when I want to be, and it was a nice thing I said. He said, "Never mind all that. What about that money for the overseas rights you promised us?"
Perfectly illustrated.
He was an amazing man. And then about a year later, you will not believe this, Paul John, I got a call from him saying, "Will you give me a reference?" I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I'm starting something new in Canada, and the regulator needs some idea of what I've been doing for the last 5 years and how good a person I've been." I said, "Fergus, you're asking me for a reference. The guy can read the bloody papers. You saved a football club." He said, "Yeah, but so anyway, I wrote it, and that was my last interaction with Fergus. I wrote a letter to him with a reference attached, and he wrote back saying, 'Thank you very much. You're very kind.'"
Remarkable man, Roger, and
remarkable. We don't realise what we got there. We were in desperate straits with not a lot of quality people around, and he fought not only the people that didn't have Celtic interest in the heart, the establishment, the Bank of Scotland, all the people we all know about, but he fought the politics of the Celtic families in a way that only somebody with that laser determination would ever have got through, in my opinion.
When I look at with hindsight, with the benefit of that, and I look at what then happens within Scottish football, Fergus McCann, when you look back at what happened within the Scottish game afterwards, you're talking about the establishment and what happened and resulted in the downfall of Rangers. Do you think, with someone at the helm like Fergus, that he would have been able to sniff that out and maybe identify it earlier than it was identified?
Well, I mean, like in those years from Fergus, but then to be fair, with Brian Quinn years as well, I heard many conversations where they were saying, "Where are they getting the money?" I remember they just bought Ronald de Boer, and I remember Brian Quinn saying, "Well, it doesn't seem like financial rules apply to them. We'll play our own game. All we can do is create a sustainable club and a sustainable business, and the truth will out." And that's what happened. It's as simple as that.
When you look across the city, Roger, and you've given us an insight into the makeup of Fergus McCann, on the other side we had David Murray. What's your memories of any dealings that you may have had with David Murray?
I had quite a lot of dealings with David, more than Fergus. David's a pirate. Whether it's to do with the fact about he nearly lost his life and he wanted to suck every little bit of juice out of life, and he was going to cut corners and he was not going to listen to accepted wisdom. That's what he was. I mean, I remember various stories. Once And this all comes back to even around today and Scottish football and getting votes and getting the number of clubs to vote for you. In my day, I needed to get 11 out of 12, which meant I needed one of Celtic and Rangers. The other 10 always did exactly what I told them was the right way to do it. There was they debated, but at the end of the day, even if they didn't agree, they said, Roger, we'll do it for you. It's important you're our leader. Celtic and Rangers weren't like that. So, you had Fergus at Celtic who wouldn't gift you anything. So basically a league is very simple. Anything that you bring, the value you can create, most of it's generated by Celtic and Rangers, and it's not going to be given to them. A lot of it's going to be given to the other clubs. So the conversation is always exactly the same. It's, this is a good deal, but, we should get 80% of this. You know that, Roger, don't you? I say, yes, I do, but I can't give you that. That's not how the rules set up. And Celtic just played that straight as a bat. Well, that's not a good deal for us. It's a no. I respected that, and we never kind of fell out. But I knew that that's how they were going to play it. So I just took a different line always with David. I'd say, look, David, I need this. I need to get this through. The league needs to keep going. Look what you're doing now. You're buying moles. You're buying these people. You're competing at the top end of the Champions League. Are you going to break my balls by stopping me doing a little deal to sell 6 games to the BBC? Surely you're bigger than that, David. And then that was the line I gave him once, and he never even answered. He just lifted the phone to David Kells at Celtic and said, "That deal's approved. You can do what you want, but he's got his 11." He was. That was my tactic with him. I appealed to the fact that he had an ego, that he was playing a bigger game, but at the same time he was a lot easier to deal with. Paul John,
Mm-hmm.
you would go into his office in Charlotte Street, and he would say things like, listen to this. And these were the days before phone hacking and everything like that came out. He said, listen to this, and he would have the ability to get into the answering machines of whoever, and he would do it. It's because that's who he was, and he would have a laugh about that. To be fair to him, he would always have a laugh a little bit. I never thought David had any what I would call any Rangers badness in him. People say I was wrong about that, and I always look at the right side of people, but I never sensed anything anti-Catholic about him. He had a guy working for him, Nick Peel, who was one of his senior guys, along with Martin Bain, and Nick Peel's a Catholic. And he would come and he would say, you lot, I pull Nick's leg because he's one of you lot, and blah blah blah, and it was normal banter. In my opinion, it was normal banter. People say I'm wrong on that, but I thought his game was not about Celtic Rangers bigotry. His game was being about somebody that could claim to be at the top of European football.
Without a doubt, Roger, and it kind of leads me on to the question of the old firm as it was then, and an alliance that may have existed, because a business alliance, I mean, were they actively looking to get out of the Scottish game back then, Roger?
Well, I need to tell you the story about that, because the story is fact, and it gives you an answer that's not subjective. Relatively early in 1998 still, I got a visitor at Hampden Park, John Colquhoun, who at the time was, and still is, an advisor to Celtic, I think, and he was very close to Allan MacDonald, who had just replaced Fergus. And John Colquhoun said, look, you and Allan have got off on the wrong foot, which we had done because of May the 2nd and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it should have been 1999, in the middle of 1999, because we published the whole QC report and everything like that, and Allan MacDonald didn't like that. You and he have got off on the wrong foot, but you're exactly the same kind of people. You're innovators. Allan wants to sit down with you and listen to your vision, my vision of European football. So we set up this dinner, secret dinner near Harthill Station, private room and everything like that. And he was quite good at, breaking the ice, because there had been tension before then. And we talked about various things, and he knew my background. And I can't remember the order of it, but at one point in the evening, he says to me, he says, I'm thinking of buying Damien Duff. What do you think? And, I've told this story before, but it's a great story, so I'll repeat it. I was a big player of Football Manager, so I knew exactly who Damien Duff was, down to all the characteristics, left foot, right foot, injuries, tackling, heading. And I basically went through them all. And I said, well, it's not for me to say, but, I think this is a good player. So we started talking a little bit about Celtic and, common, what we started this conversation with, remembering the gold days, being one of the top 5 teams in Europe for many, many years. That was our common childhood. And he said, I want to get back there. And I said, so do I. But not just for Celtic. My role now is to get the whole of Scottish football back there, because we used to get to finals regularly as a country, and semi-finals. And I'm not just talking the Old Firm, I'm talking Hibs, Kilmarnock, and then obviously Aberdeen, Dundee United, Dundee. And he said, look, well, the only way you can do this is to break out of this bloody small market that we're in. Football's the only industry in the world that you can't service the market that's next to you once you outgrow your domestic market. I said, that's the nail on the head, Alan. If we don't get out of this 5 million market, we're going to die. And he said, well, the Dutch think like that, and some of the Belgians do. Do you want to work this up? I said, I will work this up on one condition. This is never about Celtic getting out or the Old Firm getting out, because I can't sustain that, can't support that. I will work on a solution that works for my 12 clubs, which will basically be around full promotion and relegation to the Atlantic League, which it was. With some mechanism, we'll work it out. The maths will be difficult, but we'll work it out. And there will be a dowry left from the monies that the new league gets to make sure that no SPL club is worse off financially. He said, deal. And I think we shook on it. So I said, look, you need to let me run with this. If it's seen as you, then it'll just be... He said, fine. And then, the history shows that for about a year, I did, all the work on that, got all 12 clubs to back it and publicly support it on those conditions. Same time, David wasn't interested really. Campbell was around, and Campbell Ogilvie, and he kind of supported it a little bit, but he also knew that David was playing the game of, their line at the time was Atlantic League. We're after the Champions League, but in the background, Campbell was with us, so we had a plan. Then one day I went to Neon UEFA with Jack McGinn, who at that time was acting chief executive of the SFA. Very, very interesting. 2 Catholics representing Scotland, Scottish football at the very highest level in 1999. Yeah. People forget that sometimes when they go into their paranoia a little bit. So Jack's Jack, coming back to the previous Celtic board, I'm not a big fan of what Jack presided over, both near liquidation, administration, or being bankrupt, whatever you want to call it. And secondly, the Mo Johnson thing. I don't think Jack's legacy is covered in glory. Never really hit it off with Jack. Pleasant, no more. And we went there and, lukewarm. I was saying to him, look, UEFA doesn't listen to leagues. It doesn't listen to clubs. It listens to the FAs. The FA in Scotland is you, Jack. Are you supporting this? Because we won't get this through. UEFA will just look at you and say, are you up for this? And, half answers, and we'll see and build a consensus, all the usual political stuff. And what happened was exactly that. They looked at the Belgian FA, the Dutch FA, the SFA and others, and they went up for this, and it died. It died in half an hour in a meeting in Neon that day. And then we moved on to getting Celtic and Rangers into England, again with a similar type formula. Can we come into the Premiership? Can we come into what was called the Nationwide in those days, now called EFL? Different formulas, but there I didn't have the same control. Again, the records will show that Brian Quinn, Dermot, they were out in publications like the Financial Times saying it is inevitable, I'm quoting here, it is inevitable that within 5 years we will be playing in English football. And when that happened, it became extremely difficult to control. There was a lot of tension at the SPL boardroom that Eric took a lot of the heat for. I'd started thinking about the new TV deal, and then I had two of my main assets, saying that they wouldn't be long-term committed to Scottish football. So the years 2000, 2001, and certainly 2002 were extremely tense.
If, for example, that was to be mooted again, Roger, and I've said a few times on the podcast as well, it may be that the circumstances are going to change as a result of what's happened with the pandemic and what may happen with certain clubs all over the globe. Do you think this was of its time? Is this something that won't happen in the future in relation to Celtic, for example, leaving Scottish football?
Listen, at the end of the day, I look a lot at just the economics. Mm-hmm. And what I told you that I'd said in 1999, i.e. there is no future economically for football in a country of 5 million competing with countries 10 times that, and then it's going global. There is no future in that. There is no scenario that is a good look for Celtic coming out of that. So that famous expression, there is no alternative. That's, my whole time at the SPL was about environment change. If I couldn't get the Atlantic League, I wanted to get us merging with the English leagues. When I left, that died, for whatever reason. And everybody went back and found their new strategy. There's no getting away from that. Unless that happens, the relative decline of Celtic and Scottish football will continue for another 20 years. And people say, well, you must talk up the game. I refuse to do that. And under any objective way of looking at it, Scottish football and Celtic are significantly relatively weaker than they were at 2000, the year 2000. And you can hide that in trebles, you can hide that in 9 in a row. The fact is, we are not the power we were as a club and as a footballing nation, and it's because the market is too small. It's just really simple, Paul John.
So still looking at some kind of alternative, like you say, to get us out of the Scottish game. I know you have described the standard as being poor, and you concede that people may think it's poorer than it is, but we've got to understand that the overall standard is actually poor. That's something that I've heard you saying, and I don't disagree with that, Roger. When you're looking at Celtic as a club who have been built on European success in the 60s and 70s, then, the only way to try and recapture that success, I would suggest, is out with the Scottish game. So I don't disagree with you, Roger, and I've probably been criticised myself for saying it.
Yeah, listen, I've thought about this a lot as I've got older, and who I am as a Celtic fan and who I am looking back at Scottish football. And let's just talk about Celtic, because frankly, I don't really care about the rest of Scottish football. Let's just talk about Celtic. There are different types of fans now, the way I see it. There's guys like me who have moved away from Scotland, where Celtic is a nice part of their life, an interesting thing that we feel fondness for, something we'll be interested in when it becomes quite a key moment. But we realise, because we're not in the Goldfish Bowl of Scotland, we realise what Celtic is. There's a lot of guys like me who have got that attitude. Love, we certainly want to make sure we win and they lose, but we're not going to get carried away by the domestic trebles. Then you've got the younger guys, the way I see it, whether you call them the Green Brigade or not, that have grown up without any memory of competing at the very top level of Europe and being respected, that when a team like Juventus gets drawn with Celtic, the Italian people would say, oh shit, that's the draw we didn't want. I remember those days. You probably do as well. These young kids don't. So they, in the ultra culture, the way I see it, have kind of like grasped onto non-footballing things. A bit of politics, a little bit of like, you know what I'm talking about. And I understand that when you're not winning internationally, other things become important. Brand, your identity, the why, all that kind of stuff. And I see that's happened at Celtic. And then you've got the folks who are happy with domestic trebles, Yeah. I just am not one of them. I like sport and I like my club because I want to compete. I don't want to lose to Copenhagen and Cluj and all the teams that we've lost to, that even the money argument doesn't hold because we're richer than them. We are punching well below our weight. So the way I see things going forward is there's a, like in everything in life, there's a generational change, between my guys. There's a demographic change, the ones that are in Scotland, the ones that aren't. And then, you've got 10 in a row. I'll ask you a question because this never gets asked as far as I can see. What happens after 10 in a row? What is the strategy for Celtic? How are we still going to market ourselves as something that people should really get excited about? People forget, when it was 4, 5, 6 in a row and Rangers weren't there. The season ticket holders weren't always turning up. It was getting boring. 10 in a row has given us and is giving us what I fear is the last remnants of deep, deep passion. And after that, Celtic needs to find a strategy. What are they going to be? What are they going to set themselves out as? Are they going to be content to say I'm a Scottish club, or are they going to have a strategy to do something more? Are they going to really work on the academy much, much more, or are they going to continue and look for shot in the dark French boys that 1 out of 3 will succeed? Because that's the ratio. As far as I can see, that's the ratio. Oh, and by the way, the transfer market isn't going to be as lucrative as it was the last 10 years because we're going into a sports recession. I don't see any thinking about what do we do once we get 10 in a row, which we will get. What do we do when we're at 11 and 12? How do we keep people coming back? That, for me, is the big debate.
What's next? Roger, I have been pondering that myself, and I've asked a few people who know a lot more about football finances than I do, and I think that is a big fear for me, and that's why I continually ask about moving away from the Scottish game. People criticise me for that, but it's with that in mind, Roger, looking at the business side of Celtic, no alternative.
The people that say to you, be happy, we're dominating, 10 trophies in a row, tell them they're wrong, because they won't listen to somebody like me. They'll listen to you, tell them they're wrong. Celtic need to get out.
I agree with you there, Roger. Now, I'm looking at the demise of Rangers after quite some time after you had left your position. Did it surprise you, Roger, when it became known that Rangers had been abusing the system in terms of contracts and payments to players to ensure their domination continued in Scotland?
Yeah, listen, I know what's behind this question because a lot of those double contracts were there also in my time. Did I think about that? No. Did I worry about that? No. Then, at those times, Rangers were still Rangers and in the pomp of the David Murray Bank of Scotland glory, if you will. Mm-hmm. So there was never anything around it or saying, well, can these guys pay for this? Like I mentioned before, where's the money coming from? But, when you've got Gavin Masterton and Bank of Scotland behind you, then solvency wasn't an issue. A whole lot of things then happened, before Murray sold, they changed and there was a lot less money for them and they had to start thinking about balancing the books, which they did well. I thought after Martin O'Neill in 2000 and then up to 2002, I thought Celtic would not lose another championship after that. And I have to say, I think a few of them, I think Rangers won 3 in a row in those years.
Yes,
I think an honest Celtic fan and an honest Celtic person would say we totally fucked up. We had them in 2002, and we would now be at 20 in a row. Okay, I may come across as somebody that wants everything and wants utter total performance. Maybe that's what I'm like, but they were on the back foot after 2000, and we slipped up a wee bit. But then, so then you had Setanta go down after my time, and then you had the main thing, which is the main financer of Rangers, the Bank of Scotland, then called H-Boss, went bust, and at that point, all bets are off. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that's your question. I think you're saying, was I surprised, looking back at what they'd been up to at the time? I have to say, and it's not really about Rangers, it could be about Elon Musk and what he's getting away with. It could be about all the things I saw as an auditor. I've worked with Robert Maxwell. I've worked with Rupert Murdoch. Shit happens. Like these guys aren't playing softball. And you either accept that and realize that's life, because or you say, no, I want a completely ethical way of doing business in the world. Then I would just say, well, tell you what, see that company that's British called British Aerospace that sells to all these awful regimes and it employs X thousand people in the UK. You start there. But don't draw your line where you want to draw the line. You're either realizing the world is 60 shades of grey and you accept it and you keep your own ethics and your own decorum, or you become completely unmanageable in this world. And so I was a surprise, not really. I'd already, at that age, I would be 40, 45. I'd already seen a whole lot of stuff in the world that would make your toes curl. That would be my answer. I don't know whether that's a satisfying answer, but that's as honest as I can be.
Well, I think you mentioned a period there, when Martin O'Neill started winning trophies for Celtic and we were approaching it differently in terms of the financial aspect of that, Roger. And previous to Martin O'Neill, there was the period of John Barnes and Kenny Dalglish where Celtic spent a lot of money with very little in return. Was there ever a point, do you think, looking at it from a financial level, that Celtic were trying to go toe-to-toe with this financially doped club in Rangers, and Celtic actually at a point had to draw back from that? Otherwise we may have also been staring down the barrel of a gun. Would that ever have been a concern for you as a Celtic fan?
Yeah, I mean, there's three moments, I think. The first one was the Fergus one we talked about. The second one was the Allan MacDonald period, where, I mean, I don't know how common knowledge this isn't back there, but Allan and Brian Quinn, after an initial period, they didn't really get on at all. And I got very close to Allan MacDonald where, he gave me some really strong information about him personally and what he was feeling. That's why I never criticise too much Peter and even, David Murray, because, I've seen close enough to know the pressures of those two jobs. And Allan wasn't about Rangers, I don't think. Allan was about, I'm going to make Celtic the way it was when I was a kid. It's a great brand. It's an international brand. I need to invest, and I can do that. I didn't think it was, keeping up with Rangers. I think he had his own plan to make Celtic a global football brand. Difficult guy, I told you about the meetings I had with him, and then the day later he would call me up. He'd say, do you want to come over for a coffee? We had just signed at AL Berkovic, and he said, great news, what are the overseas rights in Israel now? I said, look, Allan, we sold the overseas rights a year ago in a package to IMG. They're gone, they're not ours. Oh no, that's not good enough. They're worth much more now. We've invested in AL Berkovic, and he went off in one, because I said, Allan, you're simplifying something that's pretty complex. And there's a whole lot of moving pieces. Don't tell me about complexity. I build fucking airplanes with the expletives, right? And that was the night after that we'd had the Damien Duff talk. I'm talking about literally the night after, the day after that night. So Allan, I think, was a big picture guy. I don't think he was particularly focused on Rangers. He was focused on getting Celtic back to where he was. They lost a lot of money. They raised some money, and there was chats about this can't go on. And Allan didn't last very long. By the way, before he went, he did offer me a job there. One day you'll replace me type line. Actually, pretty publicly, he did it in the boardroom at one point. It was relatively embarrassing. So that was the second moment, and the third moment was after the great days of Seville, where Peter Lawwell comes in and says, "Oh, very well, but we've just lost $6 million. This isn't sustainable." You may remember Brian Quinn and his hacked phone message, linking it to David Murray. It wasn't David, but where he was saying, "I'm not going to be made a liar by Martin O'Neill." You remember that? That's in the public domain. Yeah. Because Martin was saying we need to spend more. We need to spend more. All managers do that, even the blessed ones. And everybody knew it wasn't sustainable. Peter came in and was given a remit to find a new strategy, which he did magnificently. Which was Champions League, sell the players, player strategy, and you know, those three moments. At one point, I remember Eric Riley saying to me, he said, look, you know, we're in great shape financially just now, but it can turn on a dime in football. Mm-hmm. And we always need to be prepared. And, you know, I think Celtic and Peter for 15, 20 years nearly now have done a great job on that. And it always saddens me when, you know, we have a couple of moments that are rocky, that a whole lot of the Celtic family really unload. And you know, I'm a critic of Peter in a lot of things, you know, like I say, what's the strategy now? But when he's getting attacked by what I call, let's say, whatever you want to call it, I don't want to use a word that's provocative, but when he's getting attacked, I like to say, well, no, I'm not part of that. I'm going to support him.
Would you rather the alternative, Roger, of the previous regime? You know, Peter Lawwell came in, as you say, in 2003 and has run the business to such a degree that when you go into the pandemic and you're looking at Celtic and you think, well, we're going to get through this. It's going to affect the club as a business, but we will get through it because the foundations are strong.
The only thing I would say about Peter, where I think he and I would have done it differently, is that I genuinely think Peter set out Celtic to beat them always and everywhere at the lowest possible cost possible. I think he looks at Europe as a welcome bonus if it arrives. And, you know, as long as he's got domestic dominance and a sound balance sheet, I think that's a huge win for him. And I think that's his mandate from the owner. I honestly do. I don't think Celtic have attacked the problem of Europe strongly enough. And what do I mean by that? I mean benchmarking other clubs out there that are not that different from us, that are doing it better. You know, a Gaddafi, you know, an Atalanta. Teams that are using data much more, that are looking for an edge with all the techniques that are out there. I think we have focused as a club on a super sound balance sheet and beating them. And you know why we've done that? Because in my opinion, for 90% of our fans, that's all that matters.
It's interesting, Roger, because I speak to a lot of fans who are so focused on the 10 that, as you say, Europe is kind of deemed as a bonus. Maybe it's because I'm a wee bit older. I do look at Celtic as being a European name. But listen, Roger, you've given me a fascinating insight into your life and times within Scottish football, and I've really enjoyed it. And hopefully at some point we can do it again sometime, maybe when you're back in the country. But thank you very much for your time, and all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
No, my pleasure. And, you know, we really only scratched the surface. Anytime you want to do part two, this is nice for me. It's not a burden. It's nice. And while people might not realise it, that, you know, the touch points I do have with back home and the club are very welcome with people like you. So don't hesitate to reach out. We can do part two.
I look forward to that, Roger. You take care in the meantime, all right?
Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.